Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. To note, this session is being recorded. And I'd like to start off today's meeting with saying, hello, my name is James Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of Transparency International Canada. TI Canada is the Canadian chapter of Transparency International, the world's leading anti-corruption movement. TI Canada's office is located in the city of Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis people. Although we are all meeting virtually, I invite everyone to reflect on the traditional territory within Canada where you might be seated today and joining us. I'm excited to kick off the launch of the latest TI Canada collaboration with Canadians for Tax Fairness and Publish What You Pay Canada. Together, we are informally known as the End Snowwashing Coalition, we work towards beneficial ownership transparency in Canada. Our newest report is Snowwashing Inc., How Canada is Marketed Abroad as a Secrecy Jurisdiction. We've been working on this report for quite a while. But our campaign for beneficial ownership transparency started in 2015 and really took off in 2016 with the launch of the Panama Papers that was revealed by journalists around the world. Since 2016, we have been citing Mossack Fonseca, the law firm at the heart of the Panama Papers, as an intermediary marketing Canada to their clients. The sales pitch boiling down to bring your dirty money to Canada and it will be cleaned like the pure white snow, hence the term snowwashing. But beyond Mossack Fonseca, who else makes up what we'll call Snowwashing Inc.? In this report, we looked at companies that are actively marketing Canada based on our global reputation for the rule of law, but also our reputation for corporate opacity and historically lax anti-money laundering enforcement. Certainly, many of the clients of the service providers who promote Canadian secrecy engage in legitimate business. But as journalist Oliver Burlow has said in his book, Moneyland, the gray money of secrecy jurisdictions bumps up against and masks the dark money stored there. While there's no silver bullet to tackle money laundering, the sales pitches of these service providers make it obvious that Canada needs beneficial ownership transparency. And it can't just be at the federal level, where the government announced that we'll have a publicly accessible beneficial ownership registry, but not until 2025. The provinces need to get on board with this initiative as well. We've already seen the province of Quebec pass legislation last year to make beneficial ownership information transparent on their corporate registry. We've seen British Columbia implement a land ownership transparency registry. But we need to see all provinces and territories come on board with this. As I don't want to give away everything about the report, and I want all of you to hear our distinguished panel today, I'll stop there on describing the report itself. But before turning the floor over to our moderator, I will make an appeal that if you want to support our work to continue to fight snowwashing and other forms of corruption in Canada, you can make a donation at transparencycanada.ca. Make a donation, sign up to be a member, or explore how your organization can become a supporter. With that, I'm going to hand the floor over to our panelists who have plenty to say on this topic and the report itself. And I'll hand it over to our moderator for the day. I'm really excited to have her back moderating a TI Canada panel, Rita Treacher. Rita is an award-winning journalist. She is a senior business writer and columnist with the Globe and Mail. You can read her op-eds in the report on business in the Globe and Mail that came out today about our report, Snowwashing Inc. Rita, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, James. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. As you heard, my name is Rita Treacher. I'm a senior business writer and columnist with the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's national newspaper. This is going to be a really great discussion. I'm really excited. This topic has featured very prominently in some of my reporting over the years, both here at the Globe and Mail and at previous employers, including the Wall Street Journal. It's a very important issue that I hope we will see action on very soon. So just to echo some of James's remarks about that, I would like to very briefly introduce the panelists. First, we have Maíra Martini, who's research and policy expert with Transparency International. We also have Adam Ross, co-founder and partner with Templeton Research, and Graham Barrow, director of the Dark Money Files. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. We're going to start off with Adam. Adam, I'm wondering if you can give us some highlights of the report, and maybe though, before you do that, you can start off by explaining the term beneficial ownership. Not everyone who's watching today may understand what that means intuitively, and then, maybe tell us a little bit about why it is important.
Okay, thanks, Rita. Looks like I got my internet back just in time. So beneficial ownership kind of cuts to who the real people are behind, usually behind corporate structures. So who the real people are who own assets. And in order to do that, you need to go through the ownership chain of companies until you hit a real person who actually pulls the strings. I think that includes going through nominees and straw men that may be in place. And so why is that important? Well, the first step to having effective sanctions and law enforcement investigations and being able to kind of get to grips with financial crime is knowing who owns what and who is behind these corporate persons that are transacting on their behalf. And unfortunately, the way things stand now, there's a huge disconnect between who the beneficial owners are and what the rest of the world is able to see in a lot of jurisdictions. Okay,
and maybe you could give us some highlights of the report, and then I'd like to ask you a few more questions about beneficial ownership. But
absolutely. Okay, so I've got a little presentation, just a slide deck to help me run through the report. So bear with me a second. Okay, are you able to see that?
Yep.
We've got the cover of the report here. So I guess I'll, as you asked, I'll focus on kind of what the investigation involved and how the report came about and what our findings were, and then turn over to the others for kind of the more optimistic, how do we get ourselves out of this mess component of.
Hi, Adam. Just to cut in for 1 second, we can see your notes screen view if you want to change your view to slideshow.
I would. All right, thank you. Share screen.
Just bear with us, folks. It's still COVID times.
All right, how's that?
The image hasn't popped up yet. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Thanks for your patience. Yeah, the origins of this report, I think, as James said, kind of go back to the Panama Papers and Mossack Fonseca, who I kind of look back at fondly now, because they were the originals. There were some internal emails that got leaked in the Panama Papers, which where they were talking about Canadian corporate entities and how Canada is an attractive place to set up a shell company, because we have reliable rule of law, we've got opacity, we've got lax enforcement, and a great reputation internationally. And they knew that in 2010 when these emails were sent. And the conditions were still there in 2016 when we covered the Panama Papers, and the same conditions are really there today. So the guys at MOSFON, they were pretty clever, they were very sneaky, but we figured they weren't the only ones who had clocked on to the fact that Canada offers this very useful combination of secrecy, prestige, and low consequences for bending or breaking the rules. So on that basis, we started Googling, and it turns out there are plenty of other corporate service providers out there who think that Canadian companies make great shells for exactly those reasons: secrecy, prestige, and lax enforcement. So at that point, we knew that Canadian companies were being used as fronts for concealing beneficial ownership, or were being touted as useful fronts to access the global financial system. But we didn't know how widely they were actually being used. So we thought about how to test that out. To do that, we needed an open data set. And of course, Canada doesn't have open corporate registries, which is a big part of the reason why we're so attractive for people looking to dodge tax or engage in financial crime. So we use the best open registry that we have access to, and that's UK's Companies House. And for all its flaws, which I imagine Graham will get into, it's still an open data set that we can scrutinize. So the UK might seem like a bit of an odd place to look for Canadian shell companies, and it was a bit tangential, but we know that shells are often layered across multiple jurisdictions. So maybe Canadian companies would crop up there. And they did. We used keywords for our searches, like Canada, the names of the provinces, and that sort of thing. And then based on that, we got a list of Canadian entities that appear as directors, as beneficial owners, or as partners of UK entities. And then we went through the list and we started eliminating the benign ones, then looked into any that didn't look as though they had an obvious legitimate purpose. So first, I'll get into kind of that first component of the research, the intermediaries and identifying them. So this diagram we found on the website of a Russian language corporate services provider. It relates to the UK, but you could substitute the UK company for a Canadian one. And they actually suggest doing that in another page on the website. So there's the UK entity in the red circle. This is a simplified version of a structure that uses a front company. There's a UK entity, there's a Panamanian entity, which is the other building with the flag on it. There are a bunch of nominee directors and shareholders, and there's one ultimate beneficiary, the guy at the bottom. So the UK front company can hold a bank account, it can sign contracts, it can engage with banks and businesses who might think twice about doing the same thing with a Panamanian shell company. You add some nominees in the mix to ensure that the beneficial owner's name stays out of it. And there you have it. You have an anonymous tax-free structure. It can do business and move money without raising any red flags. Maybe you want to use the structure for something criminal, right? To launder money, to pay bribes, to defraud investors. If the authorities catch on in one jurisdiction, they'll need to file legal assistance requests and court applications to get that information from abroad. And even then, they'll be able to prove that they may not be able to prove that the whole structure leads back to you. But just to be safe, maybe you add a few other layers of complexity to the network, a few more jurisdictions, some other nominees, and be sure to change them up every now and again. And there's no better way to cover your tracks. So this, this structure, they don't, like all of the other corporate service providers and their advertisements, don't actually discuss the criminal enterprises that you can use them for, but the structures are there, and there are very strong allusions to that fact. This next page is a more recent page on that same website, and it details why Canada is the new UK. It's a translated screenshot, and it's in the report, so you don't need to read it in full here. But It starts by acknowledging that open corporate registries are a threat to tax dodgers. It says the trend of introducing open corporate registers in Europe and around the world has spurred a new search for havens. It's necessary to get more complex structures, it says, of course, so you can completely legally optimize taxes and freely go about your business, which is the same sort of euphemistic language we saw with all of the corporate service providers. It goes on to say that UK limited partnerships are no longer attractive because of the loss of confidentiality. And as a result, Canadian LPs are the next big thing. After all, Canada has a positive image. It isn't considered a tax haven, but it can be if you know how to play the system. It's also cheap and very easy to set up companies there. Now, of course, that wasn't the only service provider we found promoting the Canadian Shield as a front for offshore networks. We found dozens, and here are some excerpts from other websites. And our searches only found the corporate service providers who openly advertise on the internet. And I think it's important to bear in mind that this is a really discrete industry. These are people who take advantage of loopholes and they don't want to draw the wrong kind of attention to them. So sophisticated, wealthy clients probably aren't going to use somebody they found in a Google search. They're going to go to lawyers, accountants, private bankers, and get advice there. So what we found is probably just the tip of the iceberg. Now, nearly all the service providers frame these shell company structures through the lens of tax optimization. There were some regional differences. Chinese language sites would advertise Canadian shells as a way to skirt mainland Chinese currency controls. Some European sites focused on avoiding value-added tax for goods, but they all highlighted the same characteristics. Firstly, Canadian companies are opaque. There's no beneficial ownership disclosure. There's no financial reporting. You can use nominee directors and shareholders. And for some entities like limited partnerships, an offshore company can be the general partner. You can set them up and run them from abroad. Most companies don't have residency requirements, and the admin can be done remotely. And registries don't verify information or audit companies for accuracy. There's no independent oversight. There's no tax obligations as long as money isn't earned in Canada or said to be earned in Canada. And partnerships don't need to report to the tax authorities as long as that's the case, that there isn't taxable earnings. And lastly, Canada's a whitelisted jurisdiction. There's no stigma associated with it. Banks will treat you as low risk. You'll have an easier time opening accounts, moving money, and getting loans than if you were trying to do that through a traditional offshore jurisdiction. And I think that last point is key, right? Because Canadian shell companies are pretty good on a standalone basis, but where they really add value is as a front for other offshore companies. So I'd like to get into case studies now. We've got a couple. The first is a case study that looks at one of these corporate service providers. It's an outfit called TBA and Associates. They're one of the providers that were advertising Canadian entities as fronts for offshore structures. They also have a range of shelf companies, which are like ready-made, aged shells that you can purchase. And the one at the top of this list in the screenshot, 3A Business Consultors LLP, was a BC limited liability partnership that appeared as a shareholder of 10 UK companies that we'd identified in the Companies House research. So TBA advertised Canadian shells like this one as nominee shareholders for other companies around the world. Unlike the UK companies, which are transparent, and you can see who their shareholders and beneficial owners are, the BC LLP is completely opaque. None of its partners are disclosed, and it's registered to a post office box in a UPS store. So we didn't find any evidence of wrongdoing listed, linked to that specific LLP, 3ABC, but the guy who incorporated it, Joaquim Magro de Almeida, has been a nominee for hundreds of other shell companies, and some of those have been involved in some pretty shady things. One of his companies was alleged to have channeled millions in bribes in a Saudi arms deal. Some others were used in 2 separate investment frauds that we identified. Another was used in a large corporate tax evasion scheme in India, and another ran a network of rape porn websites. We also found his firm's website used fake bios and headshots for its executives, and we were able to trace those back to real people who had no connections to the business whatsoever. So naturally, we gave TBA the opportunity to comment ahead of the report, and they responded with a general denial of everything and threatened us with a lawsuit, possibly through a fake name. And they also pointed out that TBA is registered with the UK tax authorities, HMRC, for anti-money laundering supervision, which I think is a nice testament to how rigorous the AML oversight mechanisms are in the UK. The next case study ties into work that Graham's been doing for years, looking into laundromats that have been used for a number of massive money laundering schemes involving Russia and other former Soviet states. So the laundromats are vast networks of shell companies that span dozens of jurisdictions, with typical offshore centers like the Seychelles, St. Kitts and Nevis, and the BVI sitting at the top of the chain, and UK front companies sitting towards the bottom. Now, I think Graham began to see Canadian companies crop up a number of years ago, and flagged that to some of us in Canada. And I'll let him talk about the reasons why Canadian companies may have appeared. But when we reviewed the Companies House data set, there were a bunch of the UK LPs that Graham had linked to these laundromats. So they were picked up in the keyword searches because each of them had a general partner based in Canada. There were 6 Albertan LPs that together controlled several dozen entities in the network based in the UK. Each of the UK LPs was in turn controlled by an offshore company that was registered in places like Nevis, the Seychelles, or the Marshall Islands. This structure chart gives you a little snapshot into one of those UK LPs and its chain of control. Graham had submitted a version of this as part of his testimony to the Cullen Commission, which was British Columbia's independent inquiry into money laundering. And the entity in the red circle off to the left is one of the 6 Albertan LPs. So control goes from the top to the bottom. There's a Scottish LP named Luxembourg, which was involved in around $65 million in transactions that were flagged in Danske Bank's money laundering investigation. It's controlled by another LP, Huxon Projects, and Huxon has a number of general partners, or had a number of general partners over the years. Entities in Northern Ireland, South Africa, the Seychelles, and now Alberta. It would swap them out pretty regularly, as any self-respecting money laundering network would do. So the Alberta entity, Cliffmount, is controlled through 2 shells based in Nevis, and that's where the trail ends. You can't go any further with Nevisian companies. The Canadian LP is as far as the UK's Companies House data can go, as far as the ownership chain goes, because Alberta records aren't open. You need to order through an agent. You need to pay $15 to $20 in order to get what is essentially public information, which is how we were able to link it back to those shell companies in Nevis. But if you're a bank with automated AML software, that's not going to flag that you're fronting for companies offshore. As far as they're concerned, you're an Alberta LP with no connection to a high-risk offshore jurisdiction. So a third case study we looked at involved an oil deal in Kazakhstan between a Russian state-owned oil company and the president's son-in-law. And there were all sorts of red flags with this one. But ultimately, we couldn't find concrete evidence of corruption based on public sources alone. So for some reason, the Russian company felt the need to conceal its involvement in the deal. So it set up a UK LLP and controlled that through 2 Quebec shell companies, which is how we identified it. And I think without getting into the specifics of that deal, I think it really gets to the heart of why transparency is important. We're hosting this event while Ukraine's being bombed to pieces, and we're faced with the worst global security crisis in decades. And the main weapon we're using against Russia is sanctions. So, of course, blanket trade sanctions will hurt the Russian economy. They'll hurt everyday people. But the ones that are targeting Putin and his oligarchs and their wealth are being completely undermined because it's so easy to control assets and chains of ownership through structures like the ones I just outlined. So going back to that Kazakh deal, the Russian oil company behind Quebec shells, it hasn't been sanctioned yet, but its CEO has. And if the company was added to our sanctions lists tomorrow, we'd have a really hard time determining what other offshore corporate structures it had under its control. So unfortunately, I think it's too late to fix the system in time to help Ukraine, but this isn't going to be the last time we need to turn to sanctions as a deterrent. So I think we'd better get our house in order soon. Thank you.
So Adam, before we move on to Graham, I mean, you've talked about this as part of the report, but I'm just wondering if you could put a finer point on it. How is Canada doing on beneficial ownership compared to other countries? I mean, it would seem we've become a preferred jurisdiction because we're not doing so well. I mean, at least that's the lesson I'm taking from your report. What would you say the takeaway is on that?
I think that captures it very accurately. We're belatedly at least signaling that we're going to make some changes. There's been a pledge to introduce a public pan-Canadian beneficial ownership registry in the next several years. But we've got a federal system and all of the provinces and territories need to be on board. And if history's any guide, we aren't very good at enforcing our laws and regulations. And so we have the UK as a great example of a jurisdiction that has open data, but it's not enforced and there's no sort of verification. So the data is unreliable and it takes independent investigators, people like Graham, people like myself, to scrutinize that and show how ridiculous some of the registrations are and the kind of the flagrant non-compliance with the rules. And so I think we've got a great opportunity in Canada to do this right, to learn from the mistakes of some of the other jurisdictions. But we've got a long way to go, and we don't really have much time to lose.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Adam. Graham, this is a good place to segue and turn the attention to you. I'm wondering if you can talk about how important beneficial ownership and the registry Companies House has been in the UK. I know it's not perfect, but it's better than what we have in Canada.
Rita, thank you. And Adam, that was a really interesting presentation. Thank you, and a pleasure to be here today. So look, I spend an inordinate amount of time in that register. I spent more hours of a day trawling through what I can only say is the darker side of Companies House, and it's probably healthy. But do you know, I have learned so much. Can I just give you a very quick anecdote? I now monitor company formation in real time. And yesterday I spotted 6 companies being incorporated in the UK, all of which have got US directors and owners, and they had a certain typology about them, which I thought that these are not right. So I tweeted about these 6 companies, and I said, I'm going to take a punt here and say these 6 people do not know they've just been made directors of companies in the UK. Almost instantly, I've had a response from a US attorney who's acting on behalf of somebody with the same name and lives in the same town as one of those people who had their identity stolen a few months ago. And we've now established that it is the same person. So this is serious stuff. But the brilliant thing is, and it's not brilliant for that person, but because we have this wonderful open data, in real time, we can spot people doing things wrong. Now, picking up on something Adam said, obviously the UK has led the world in this transparency. We have completely free to access data. It is on a really, really good server. It's quick, it's easy to access, but it is poor data. Now, initially, I think when we went transparent, lots of people with suspicious intent, choose my words carefully, thought, oh, this is the end of the world because we love UK companies, because everyone thinks UK very low risk. And so initially, of course, it did start stopping using some of our vehicles. But then when they realized that nothing actually was ever checked, and they thought, now we've got a really good wheeze now, because what we can do is we can create UK companies, which look fantastic. And as Adam's graphic showed, we can spread the ownership of those UK companies around a whole bunch of other secrecy locations. And sadly, Canada is one of those secrecy locations. So what looks on the surface to be a fully transparent declaration of ownership leads you nowhere. In fact, the graphic that Adam showed you with the Albertan Limited Partnership has got the same two owners at least one of the others, because it's in Northern Ireland and I can look at that. They're the same two people. I suspect each one of those 5 entities that's on that graphic ultimately resolves to the same two companies in Nevis, and Nevis is one of the most secretive locations in the world. So sadly, you along with the UK are just making it easy for people with criminal intent to look like they've got these very secure companies in some of the safest countries in the world, and actually we're just a portal through to this kind of, this black hole where nothing escapes financially because you can't look inside and see what's going on.
Well, I've used Company House for my research for many stories about money laundering in Canada. So I completely hear what both you and Adam are saying about the usefulness of these registries. There's a lot of information that you can find out. Graham, can you tell us a little bit about how you contributed to the case study that's highlighted in the report?
Yeah, so I was intimately involved ultimately in the Danske Bank story by chance, and I won't bore you with that, but it just so happened that I'd written about a company that was actually involved in the Danske Bank story. So I was contacted by the journalists, and they very kindly shared some information with me that allowed me then to go and do some more research. And I found this one particular company called Luxembourg that was involved in Azerbaijan. And oddly, Azerbaijan actually has some levels of transparency. Actually, it publishes government contracts. And I was able to see that this company, Luxembourg, had won government contracts. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And then, of course, this network underneath it revealed itself as, it's not interesting at all, because I now can't find out anything else because it resolves to these secrecy locations. But I think it is used in a specific way, and it's worth just spending a couple of minutes explaining this, because lots of these Scottish limited partnerships, which is that one at the top, are actually used by people within countries, I'm going to say like Azerbaijan rather than in Azerbaijan, by people who have corrupt intent. And the great thing about them is, because you can't see their ownership of these, what look like overseas companies, they can then corruptly pitch for contracts in their own country, make it look like inward investment from overseas, when in actual fact, they are the people who, if you could ever get through to it, own these companies, who then get awarded contracts which are hugely overpriced, which they then cream money off, and back through that network, that money will be sent, ultimately, usually to an offshore bank account somewhere in some sunny part of the world. So they carry on with that corrupt activity, enriching themselves, all the while making it look like it's an inward investment from foreign countries. So, it's a scandal of epic proportions. And here in the UK, and I'm sorry to say over in Canada, we are enablers of that sort of corrupt activity by providing these opaque structures, by not doing full checking on the identities of the underlying beneficial owners, that is just allowing the poor people of these countries to be impoverished at the expense of a few very influential people who are enriching themselves at their expense.
Okay, it is indeed very eye-opening, the report. The audacity of some of these intermediaries it's really quite eye-opening, which is why I wrote a column about the report that's in today's Globe and Mail. Maira, we want to bring you into the conversation at this point because I think it's really important to get a sense from you about what is a global outlook for beneficial ownership transparency.
Thanks a lot. And it's really a pleasure to be here and also to learn more also about the report and the case study is super interesting. Maybe I take us back to 2019 when we at Transparency International did a very quick research looking at how countries across the globe have been dealing with beneficial ownership transparency. So I think a lot of those countries have committed in different places, in different forms, to bring more transparency to companies and ownership structures. But what we found actually is that in 2019, in 85% of the countries we looked into the only source of information available to authorities was the information collected by banks. So if you wanted to know who is behind a company as a law enforcement, a tax authority, or a financial intelligence unit, you actually would need to first find out with which bank that company had a relationship, and then you would have to make a request. If that bank was in another jurisdiction, this could mean that a response to your request, if it ever arrived, could take more than a year. And that's actually documented. This is actually written in mutual evaluation reports that are produced by the Global Anti-Money Laundering Standard Setter, that is the Financial Action Task Force. So that was the situation in 2019. And that led clearly to a scenario where authorities themselves were screaming, we don't have access to the information we need to be able to investigate, to be able to enforce sanctions, to be able to track money and so on, right? Now, from 2019 until now, a bit has changed. We have a lot more countries that have been establishing beneficial ownership registers and so on, but we've challenged, that I think Graham mentioned some of them. I will touch upon some others. But just to say that if we look at these evaluations I was talking about that are put together by the Financial Action Task Force, in Canada in particular, which the latest one is from 2016, there is a paragraph there where is a clear statement, law enforcement authorities in Canada themselves saying, we have the powers we need, we have resources, right? But we still cannot identify the beneficial owners of Canadian legal entities or legal arrangements because this information is not collected. And the same was in the UK. And this also has an impact on international cooperation. So I thought, for me, one of the funniest statements is in the Australia review, where they say, authorities in Australia say, when they're asked how they can cooperate and share information, they basically say, what is not required to be available in our country cannot be shared. So don't bother to ask us. We can't give you any information. So now we reached a situation where we do have beneficial ownership rules, transparency rules with public registers across the EU, for example, of course, with varying levels of implementation, but in much more recognition that the importance of having that information in registers and not only relying on banks or on corporate service providers as those that are advertising Canada as a tax haven. No? And mostly important, just 2 weeks ago, there was a recognition by the global standard setter, the Financial Action Task Force I just mentioned, that this should be the new standard. So there was the revision of the standards on beneficial ownership transparency. And now countries that are committed to those recommendations that are put forward by this body will have to set up beneficial ownership registers. So that means that Canada, okay, there was already a commitment, but now we'll have to, if they want to comply with those standards, also move in that direction. The standards have some other interesting things that I think speak to some of the findings of the report. And one of them is also stricter rules when it comes to nominee shareholders and directors. So I think Adam was showing to us how those corporate service providers were also advertising those type of service. No, we can offer you a name that will be the name that will be in publicly accessible documents. So now they standard propose more rules. So licensing those individuals, having more responsibility, making sure that they are declared simply as a nominee and make very clear that they are not responsible, they're not in control, they don't benefit from the companies, and so on and so forth. I think also just to mention that we have been talking a lot about the benefits of having this information to law enforcement authorities, but the benefits go beyond that. No, there's also a lot of benefits to private sector in being able to access this register that goes from fraud prevention to ability of checking on investors, investments, or suppliers, or many other things. And then also the benefits of having civil society and journalists and academia being able to scrutinize this data as well. And as Graham does on a daily basis, identify potential red flags. This is what authorities actually should be doing, no? So identify the red flags that could lead to further investigation, and so on. But also, I think beyond, we always talk about beneficial ownership transparency in the context of money laundering, but thinking in many contexts, I think there is an additional use that goes beyond money laundering. So in public procurement, for example, no, there is certainly an added value in have that information, or even when we talk about foreign influence in elections. So we know that a lot of shell companies are also being used to influence or pay for misinformation campaigns and so on. No, so there is definitely a use there as well. Maybe just to mention one concrete example, because what our research has also shown is that the type of beneficial ownership register you have and you choose to have will also influence on how it can be used. And then I think as Canada moves in the direction of thinking, no, what is the beneficial ownership register that will be established, this is key to be considered. And what we heard from someone who works at a financial intelligence unit was that their life changed when they were able to download the data of their own register, which they weren't able to do a couple of years ago. So it's about making that information available in structured data for authorities themselves, but also for the public. This will certainly allow different types of use, from improving policy to actually detecting and identifying concrete case. We did publish a list of 10 or so case studies looking at the impact of having this data available. No? So detecting conflicts of interest, detecting potential grant corruption, tax evasion, environmental crime. So there is certainly, from the few registers that are out there with information that is available for free, some of them in open data, some of them not, already allowed journalists and civil society to easily detect those cases. So there is certainly proof there of the add value of those registers.
I mean, this is such an important thing for any, developed country in particular to have a handle on by now. I mean, it's almost shocking that Canada is a G7 country, and we haven't actually made as much progress as we should have by this point. Maira, given the situation in Ukraine and concerns about Putin, Adam kind of touched on this earlier, but I want to ask you, how important is this issue given what's happening right now?
Yeah, I think Adam was mentioning the importance of this if we want to enforce sanctions. No, I would take a step further, because of course enforcing the sanctions that are now being enacted is really important. But this is also about prevention, right? Having that information should have a deterrent effect, we would hope, if registers are good. And then also ensuring that authorities can use this data to detect these things early on. We cannot be playing this game of hide and seek forever, that they open 100 companies in 100 different countries, and authorities now have to try to put resources together to trace those assets in a kind of like very impossible manner. So I do think that while a lot of reform, as you mentioned, like I think the reforms that are now being planned are late, no, to help with the situation of Russia and Ukraine, but we really hope that is a wake-up call, really, no, that this is really necessary if we want to also prevent this from happening again in the future, if we want to defend our democracies, if we want to uphold rule of law. This is an essential change that needs to happen.
Okay, we only have about 10 minutes left, but Graham, just really quickly, I mean, you've given evidence to the Cullen Commission. How confident are you that this is the moment of change for Canada?
I would love to say I'm very confident, but one of the things we always have to think about is this tension between personal privacy and open data and transparency. And you know, obviously, when I gave evidence to the Cullen Commission, there was quite a strong kind of pushback from some quarters about, but what about people's right to privacy? And it's a debate we should have. But my response is this, Rita. No one ever was forced to have a legal entity. No one ever said you've got to have a company. Why do people do it? Well, obviously, partly because they can hide their ownership, but also because it provides benefits. It provides limited liability. It's in the name of a limited company or a limited partnership. It provides tax advantages. I think society should demand, as a quid pro quo, if you wish us to provide you with these benefits for something you do not have to have, that you choose to have, we in turn demand from you the right to transparency of your ownership. So, you know, I hope that argument wins, but you know, there is a powerful lobby for privacy, and I think we need to sell, you know, that argument that we can't be giving people these benefits and get nothing back in return, and all we ask is that your details are transparent. So I'm cautiously optimistic, shall we say?
Okay, yeah, we need some optimism. we absolutely do. I mean, when just as we started to come out of the economic crisis caused by this pandemic, we had the United Nations warning about illicit money flows undermining the economic recovery. Now, of course, we have the situation with Russia and Ukraine. It seems, you know, the importance of this issue, there's so much attention on this. I mean, it can't be understated, the importance of this issue. Adam, final question to you before I turn the floor back to James. You know, what is your wish list for not just the Canadian government, but also the provinces and territories? Like, what does Canada need to do? What should be on its fix-it list?
Okay, prioritizing is going to be tough here because there are so many things. I think, firstly, all of the provinces and territories and the federal jurisdiction as well. We've got 14 corporate registries in Canada, 14 jurisdictions. There needs to be a united front. The bar needs to be raised across the country. Otherwise, we're just going to have jurisdictions of convenience within Canada where certain provinces become destinations, havens on their own. So everyone needs to be on board. I think related to that, we can't wait for a consensus from all of the territories and provinces. We need a critical mass, and then those who are willing and able to push forward at this point do that, and the others will follow suit. There are a couple of technical things like independent verification of data. We've seen in the UK that because anyone can put data in, and there's TI Canada has a report forthcoming about quality of data and the registries in Canada, and it's the same issue here. You can input anything and incorporate a company with fake names, fake addresses, and unless there's some independent checks, then when it comes to investigating or being able to trust that data, we're just not going to be able to do it. And yeah, and then having access, right? Making it publicly accessible, making it open so that banks can download that data and integrate it with their own data sets, so that civil society and journalists can scrutinize it as well, despite not having huge budgets to pay for proprietary data. So those are key ones for me. I could go on. I think we've articulated what the rest of the wish list is in some other reports that TI Canada and the End Snow Washing Coalition has put out. But that's a good starting point.
Okay, you have some great bullet points in the report, outlining what needs to change and what needs to be fixed. So Adam, Graham, Maira, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a great discussion. James, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Rita. And I want to thank Graham and Maira for your insights in this, and Graham, your hard work in delivering one of the case studies, even outside the context of our report, but to the Cullen Commission as well. And Maira, we've been collaborating for a time now at the international level to try and move these standards at the Financial Action Task Force, and exchanging information between Transparency International chapters about how each one of our campaigns has been going, to try and encourage each other and learn from each other and advocate where each other need it. And Rita, thanks so much for moderating once again. Always great to have you, and for all your writing on this subject and bringing it to an even wider audience. And of course, Adam, thank you so much for yet another brilliant report to the End Snow Washing repertoire that makes the case of why we need the registry. And to that point, Rita, your question to Graham about, is this a moment of change for Canada? And I think we were already going through that moment of change, as we saw from 2016, when we were first slammed by the Financial Action Task Force, when Transparency International's own report slammed Canada, when the British Columbia government unearthed not only the term snow washing, but the Vancouver model of money laundering. Other journalists like yourself, Rita, Marco Ovid, Sam Cooper, many others who have been working on this tirelessly to get it up to front, that to the point that Prime Minister Trudeau recognized snow washing as a national issue in 2019. Of course, we got hit with COVID, which slowed things down, but frankly shouldn't have, only to then finally see in 2021 the federal government announce the publicly accessible registry. But as we've seen in the past, 3 weeks now, the horrific invasion of Russia on Ukraine, it's not just Canada that's woken up to the need to fight dirty money. It's the world has snapped into action. The US has taken up some form of leadership that has been desperately missing on the global stage. The UK has been sitting on pieces of legislation to address dirty money that they have fast-tracked, despite some holes, that they have fast-tracked over the course of weekends to finally fix some of the issues that they've had. We've recognized now, and it's something that champions of anti-money laundering have been saying, this isn't just a nuisance of the rich getting to play by their own rules. This is an issue that addresses global security in enabling the kleptocrats to finance their battles, to influence elections, as Maira said, to steal from their own people and violate human rights. I think, as Maira also alluded to, this underpins issues of environmental degradation. As we go through the pandemic, we had environmental concerns and climate change always present in the background or in the foreground as fires rage. And even with the horrors in Ukraine right now, we haven't escaped the environmental degradation that dirty money helps enable. So I hope this is a turning point for the world, and I hope certainly that Canada snaps into action, not just at the federal level, where we can speed up this 2025 timeline. Even this year, we haven't yet heard anything from Innovation, Science, Economic Development Canada on their public consultation yet. So we hope to see something very soon, if not fast-tracked legislation already that can start to be debated in the House of Commons. But we need action from the federal government. We need it from the provinces and territories. And we need to follow suit with the transatlantic task forces that are now starting to address this problem. So we're not ending today with this conversation. We're not ending today with the launch of this report. We'll definitely be seeing more. Rita, we'd love to see more from your reporting. Maira, you and I will be collaborating at the global level. Graham, sadly, we'll be seeing more of your tweets about this real-time exploitation of the UK Companies House that we hope you can finally put to rest your daily observations. And Adam, we know we'll be collaborating on digging up more of why this is needed. And all of you today, thank you so much for tuning in. We know a lot of you support this cause. We know a lot of you amplify this cause and call for change in Canada. If you'd like to support TI Canada directly, please go to our website, transparencycanada.ca, and make a donation today, or become a member of TI Canada, or become an organizational supporter. Thank you also to our collaborators at Publish What You Pay Canada and Canadian Tax Fairness, who are part of the End Snowwashing Coalition. You can find out more at endsnowwashing.ca. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Great morning for those on the West Coast, and we hope to see you all soon.